Welcome once again to the Tarot by Hillary podcast. I am your hostess with the mostest, Hillary of tarotbyhillary.com, professional tarot reader and EFT tapping practitioner. Um, Here to demystify the mystical, here to teach you about tarot, here to teach you about connecting with your own intuition, all sorts of different things. And as you can tell from the intro to this podcast episode, I briefly had on Jaymers and Lis for talking about, a lapse in podcast recording, or a lapse in your newsletter, or a lapse in, whatever it is that you're trying to stay consistent on, and how it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And what really started this conversation was we were organizing uh, our episodes for Cardslingers Coast to Coast. So it was more of a planning meeting rather than a actual recording session of the podcast. And before we signed off, we organized the stuff. We wrote things down. We decided when we were going to be recording episodes and when they're going to be released, that sort of thing. And I said to them before we signed off, I need to record an episode of my own podcast because it has been months. It has been literal months since I recorded an episode or released an episode of the Tarot by Hillary podcast. What should I talk about? And they were just like, that, that right there. And maybe the reasons why you haven't been recording, and that those reasons are valid. It's not necessarily excuses. I mean, it could be considered excuses, but I've talked about this a lot recently on my live streams. And whether they're on, the Tube of You or the Book of Face or the Gram of Insta or the Talk of Tick, I've talked about being kinder to yourself, especially when you mess up, or, the concept of, well, if being hard on yourself really worked, then it would have worked by now. It would have changed something by now. So clearly being hard on yourself or being unkind or harsh on yourself doesn't work to enable lasting change. But do you know what does work? Being kind to yourself and being compassionate with yourself when you take a fall or you make a mistake or you lapse in your consistency. It's going to happen. And what do you do when it happens? Because that is inevitable. It is going to happen. You are going to have a lapse. You are going to lose your streak in Duolingo, which definitely happened, by the way, to me. So I was very annoyed by that. But the point of it is, what do you do when that happens? You start again. You begin again. And that, I think, is one of the greatest lessons that I've been learning, whether it's been in 2023, whether it's beginning 2024, is learning how to start again and being that perpetual beginner's mind, perpetual learner, perpetual, optimist, basically realizing that you're going to be starting again, starting over, not necessarily from scratch, though. And that it's going to happen, and that it is kind of a natural part of the process. Any journey, any process, you're going to be starting, and you're going to have to learn how to treat yourself with compassion and grace and kindness when those things happen and when you do have to begin again. So like I was saying before, it has been a couple of months since the last episode came out. Now, the last episode that came out was episode 44, Talk About Your Readings. And that came out in October. So it's been 2 months since the last episode came out. And in that time, I've been working my retail job. I've been busy. Also, October is one of the busiest months of the year for a tarot reader. Honestly, October and January, I think, are the two big months of my secular year when it comes to tarot reading. One, because October is spooky season. Everyone thinks about tarot reading or psychic readings or what have you during October, thinking that it's like the right time of the year to be getting a reading. And I just want to again tell you, and I know if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, or if you've been following my work for a while, or reading my website, or tuning into the live stream every week on Fridays, that I say that, I'm a tarot reader 365 days of the year. The time of the year doesn't change the accuracy of my readings. At least I don't think so. I'm about 85% accurate. That being said, there have been some times where my readings have not been stellar, or I didn't connect really with the person, or I am human after all. Like, case in point, not reporting the podcast for 2 months. But the busy seasons are usually October, because of spooky season, and then January, the month that we're in right now, where people want to know what's ahead, what's coming in 2024. And so there is a reading that I do from the Wild Unknown. It's called the 13 Moon Spread, which is basically a 13 card reading where you take a look, you basically pull a card for each month of the year. So 12 cards, and then the 13th card, which is the middle card, is the theme of the year, basically. You can also calculate that using your birth cards, or birth card, and also your year card. So basically, I don't know if I've done a podcast episode on birth cards yet, on my standalone podcast that you're listening to now, but I know I did one for Cardslingers. So if you're interested in birth cards and year cards, please go ahead and check out that Cardslingers Coast to Coast episode. It tells you basically everything on how to calculate your year card for the year 2024, or whatever year you're listening to this podcast. But January, a lot of people want to know what's coming up for the year ahead. So I would say October and January are my busiest times of year as a tarot reader. And other tarot readers that are listening to this podcast, feel free to call in and let me know what your busy times a year are. Is it October and January, or is it some other time of the year? I would love to hear it. So given all of that, and given that the last episode came out in October, like, it's just like, okay, just talking this out, I'm realizing, like, of course I didn't record episodes in the last 2 months, because this is not only the busiest time of the year for me as a tarot reader, but it's the busiest time of year for me as a retail worker too, with my part-time retail job. And also, this year has been my return to retail and holiday season retail, after I think an 8-year hiatus in which I worked retail at my friend's gift store. So I can understand now. I can give compassion to myself for not producing a podcast episode every week, every Friday, which I think is sometimes an ambitious goal in regular times. But during holiday retail season, and also during my tarot reader busy season, like, it was next to impossible. So it didn't happen. So that's part of the reason why this episode is called, and thank you to Lis and Jamie for the suggestion. This is episode 45 of the podcast. A hypothetical dog ate my podcast. So I didn't want this episode to be completely about the excuses as to why it's been 2 months since the last episode. But it's also more of a lesson that I learned, and maybe a lesson that you learn, even though I do not want to get up on a soapbox and say, you know, don't do this or do this, or you need to be nicer to yourself, like, and finger wagging, because I don't think I'm that type of person to begin with. But it may be a message that you need to hear right now, that it's just like, hey, cut yourself some slack. You know, excuses can be excuses for sure, but you know, in those excuses might be legitimate reasons as to why you haven't done the thing that you want to do, and that it's okay to begin again. And so that is my promise to you in the year 2024, where I'm going to do my best to produce an episode every week and release it on Fridays, like I said I wanted to do. But there may be some times where I don't. And I'm going to be compassionate with myself when that happens. I hope you're compassionate with me when that happens. And I hope the next time you're hard on yourself, you remember this episode and you cut yourself a little bit of slack.